have the intent to kill yourself and others, which is what this charge is, when I don't believe she wanted to die.
Well,
And again, that doesn't mean I think she's innocent. She's not innocent. She's guilty. The question is, of what?
of what? Yeah. Well, and there's obviously there's a public relations effort. Her parents are speaking publicly. They're defending her, trying to mount an appeal with new evidence of text messages, etc.
Yeah.
Where does that stand, by the way?
That's you nailed it. They believe that the texts create context, but they don't, because the only element of the crime they go to is not an element of the crime, which is motive. The shit we care about most in the true crime space does not have a place at trial. Juries want to hear about motive, as we know, but in investigations, you do means, motive, and opportunity. Those are the three boxes you're looking to check with a suspect. At trial, it's just actus reus mens rea. It's just the mindset. Did you have the requisite mindset? Did you mean to do?
There is a version of this case where Mackenzie Shirilla is a grieving teenager whose worst night became a criminal conviction. And there is a version where she is exactly what prosecutors said she was, someone who made a deliberate, lethal decision at 100 miles per hour.
Is Chris where I think you said it best once when you said there's nothing that brings America together more than stories like this.
Mm-hmm. Everybody, look, especially now, I mean, in America, we're so divided on everything that at least we accept the process here, the investigation, the trial. You may like it, you may not like it, you may see things and not see things. We all know it's not perfect, but at least it's right and wrong and not right and left. So you've got a shot. And the Shirilla case is an interesting example of how this melding of culture and ethics and morals and all this stuff comes together in this one story. I have become very controversial on this story, and I really am surprised by this, because I'm not questioning who did this or who's criminally responsible for it. Obviously, it's Shirilla. There's no question about it. I'm just saying the prosecution's case on motive makes no sense, because for it to make sense, and the judge found it made sense real quick too, you have to believe she was suicidal. I do not believe she was suicidal. I do not believe she is suicidal. So if she's not suicidal and she wasn't suicidal, then how did she intend to kill herself and them? So it's just never made sense. So then I started looking at it more, because it's one of those cases where it's right outcome, wrong rationale. Okay. So, but that frustrates me. And then once I talked to the father, I realized this was totally botched. And again, I'm not saying she's not criminally responsible. Of course she is. And I'm not surprised it was bound over, by the way. I understand why she was tried as an adult on this. I do. But there were real mistakes made here by their lawyers that absolutely made this worse for their child. There's no question in my mind.
What makes this case genuinely polarizing is that both versions are built on the same set of facts, and the legal system chose one of them using a theory of suicidal intent that no forensic evidence has ever conclusively proven. She was 17. She waived her right to a jury and took a bench trial, almost certainly to avoid the bias a jury of adults might carry toward a young woman accused of murdering her boyfriend.
The interesting thing, I think, for so many people, though, is the question of impulsivity. And people who are young can be extraordinarily impulsive. And if they give you reason to believe in, say, I don't know, a few weeks before that you have an intention to do something like crash this car with you in it, I feel like it's pretty hard to get past that.
Obviously, because the judge took her out 1, 2, 3. They also gave a judge the opportunity to do that, thinking that this was going to be a data-driven trial, a forensic-driven trial, and it wasn't. Look, I believe the lawyer didn't argue the context of those texts well, because there are other texts that he had access to, or should have, that showed Dom, these are teenagers in a volatile relationship, okay? And she has a dose of cuckoo, and I don't know that Dom did, but he decided to be with someone with a dose of cuckoo. And he said a lot of crazy things to her too. In this scenario with the car, with the grabbing the wheel, there was stuff that Dom did also that would feed this idea of instability. So it wasn't just her craziness and her violent tendencies. I think he didn't argue it well, to be honest. He barely argued it at all.
When you get these explosive, true crime stories like the Mackenzie Shirilla story, and then you add, I guess, fuel to the fire with Netflix and parents who are very outspoken, and it feels as though they don't do themselves any justice. I wonder how you felt having this conversation with Mrs. Shirilla and Mr. Shirilla, and whether you think they're doing any favors to their daughter.
I don't think they have any choice because they've got to help their kid, right? I mean, it's just the parents' mandate. I think that their way of helping her is going to wind up shifting from trying to get her out of prison to helping her deal with making it through and what she becomes after it.
She lost anyway, sentenced to 15 years to life on 4 counts of murder. If that tension between procedural logic and narrative outcome interests you, like this video and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of case this channel exists to pull apart. Here is the question you need to sit with before we go any further. Can you convict someone of premeditated murder based on a psychological state that cannot be forensically verified?
Because I do not see any real likelihood of appeal, even though I do believe she had ineffective counsel. So do they help themselves? Do they not? In the Netflix thing, absolutely not. But I think they were set up. I think that story was going to be very obvious from jump, which is looks one way, turns out it's another. And I think that the narrative won out over what was probably the most balanced assessment of the situation.
Listen, it's really hard. If you're a parent, anybody watching would say you would do anything for your child. And yet the parents of Mackenzie Shirilla have been so vilified. Do you think that, let's just go to the decision to have a bench trial. Do you think that was really their urging, or do you think this was a lawyer that gave maybe bad advice?
Yep. I don't think they know what they're talking about. They know better now, but I think they had 2 things going against them. One, they were overwhelmed, out of their depth. Okay. And 2, they were witnesses for the prosecution. So they weren't really in there and watching it in real time because of their the rules of when a witness can be there and when they can't. And this lawyer, and look, I don't mean to condemn the guy. I welcome him on the show. We've reached out to him numerous times. I understand why he doesn't want to come on. If I were he, I probably wouldn't want to either. But it was a bad decision. I understand why he made the decision. He thought a judge will be more understanding of the incompleteness of the data. The problem with that argument is not just the convenience of my saying with hindsight, you were wrong, but the data is a slam dunk. Like the father kept arguing to me, Chris, it's just 4 seconds. Do you know how long 4 seconds is? Accelerating from 50 to 100 miles an hour?
Mackenzie Shirilla was 17 years old in the summer of 2022 when she drove into a brick wall in Strongsville, Ohio, killing her boyfriend Dominic Russo and his friend Davion Flanagan. What the mainstream coverage tends to flatten is the relational texture here. Natalie Shirilla, Mackenzie's mother, describes a relationship built on vacations, shared meals, and documented affection, not the volatile, control-driven dynamic prosecutors present.
You know what I mean? People run 40 yards in 5 seconds. You know what I mean? So that's a lot of time. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what a judge absolutely saw right away. There is no evidence that she did anything but accelerate. That's a bad set of facts for you. So what do you have to argue? Why didn't she do anything? Why? Because she was suicidal and wanted to kill herself and someone else spontaneously and then never wanted to kill herself again? The only suicidal person who gets over it after the mass tragedy? I never heard of that before. What I have heard of is someone who's high out of her mind, mentally a little off. And the missing link is, 1, they didn't argue diminished capacity, and 2, she says she doesn't remember anything, which is not easy to believe. It's possible, as we both know. Medically, it happens, but unsatisfying, let's say.
It's possible more when you're hammered. But if you're a habitual marijuana user, and
Yeah.
she had used marijuana before many times and driven many
Many.
times, and then nothing like this ever happened, so it's a little harder to believe.
Yeah.
But I also just think that the kind of person Mackenzie Shirilla seems to be, I don't know her, but I sure don't like what I see in images and Facebook and Instagram and photographs and what people say about her and the things that she said and the audio tapes that we've heard. I mean, just somebody who a few months after this horrendous thing happened dresses up as a corpse for Halloween. I don't think you have any shot at getting any sympathy from anyone.
Yeah, I think she does dumb things. Look, we've both seen a lot of adults who know better, who should know better, who have people telling them better, do stupid things to act out. Because why? Well, there's a narcissism sometimes. For her, I think that there's an ignorance and a youth.
Presented. The text messages introduced as evidence, framed by the state as proof of a troubled relationship with suicidal undertones, were characterized by the family as fragments stripped of context. That gap between curated digital evidence and lived human complexity is the fault line this entire case runs along, and it is the fault line the defense never successfully bridged. The prosecution's theory rests on a specific and difficult claim that Shirilla accelerated intentionally to kill herself and the two passengers. What the footage shows is a vehicle reaching approximately 100 miles per hour in a residential area before impact. What it cannot show is intent. The defense argued mechanical failure and loss of control. The state argued the acceleration pattern was deliberate. The judge, sitting without a jury, sided with the state. Here is the forensic problem. Suicidal vehicular intent as a basis for first-degree murder is an extraordinarily rare prosecutorial theory, precisely because it requires proving an internal psychological state using external behavioral evidence. The acceleration data is real. The deaths are real. The premeditation is an inference. In Ohio, first-degree murder carries a mandatory minimum before parole eligibility. Shirilla is currently serving 2 concurrent sentences of 15 years to life. Since entering prison, she has accumulated a documented disciplinary record, including incidents involving a corrections officer and violations during video visits, which complicates any future parole narrative significantly.